everybody, and welcome to your Top Think Tanks review. I am your host, Bryce Dolan, and today we're going to cover 5 of the top United States think tanks, and we're going to cover 5 different topics. First, we're going to start with the Center for Strategic and International Studies as they look at the U.S. and the Republic of Korea's annual military exercises. We'll move on to Council on Foreign Relations and the discussion of refugees make it to New York. Then we'll go on to the Hudson Institute and what is going on in Ukraine. And then we'll stay on the topic of Russia, and the Atlantic Council questions if Russian military is a problem for NATO. Then we're going to end with the American Enterprise Institute and attitudes towards the poor, poverty, and welfare here in the U.S. Now, to begin, the United States have held twice yearly military exercises with the Republic of Korea for more than 10 years now. And since then, it has been questioned whether or not these military exercises provoke belligerent activity from North Korea and their leader, Kim Jong-il. Well, Beyond Parallel held a new study to find if these military exercises intimidate and therefore provoke belligerent activity from North Korea. The findings show since 2005, despite reports from the media and claims from Pyongyang, that these exercises actually have a null effect on such reported activity. Now, Beyond Parallel goes on to explain that relations with North Korea 4 to 8 weeks before the exercises take place is critical. They actually say if the relationship with North Korea is more positive in the 4 to 8 weeks leading up to the exercises, the chances of this belligerent activity being provoked is a lot lower. However, if the relations are more negative, their intensity and the frequency of the belligerent activities are more prone to occur. However, a study has found that the frequency of the belligerent activity from Kim Jong-il has actually increased from when he had his stroke in January of 2009. Now, all the details of this survey can be found at the bottom of the article. Now, moving on to the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haass. He wrote an article about this September's upcoming annual United Nations General Assembly in New York. Every year there is a specific topic they will give special attention to, and this year they will be addressing the plight of refugees, and rightly so. Not just refugees, and migrants as well. Now, they're going to discuss what more can and should be done to help these people, and rightly so. There's an estimated 21 million refugees in the world right now. That's just what they're estimating. They don't know for sure. Now, originally defined as those who leave their countries because of fear of persecution, refugees now also include those who leave their countries because of fear of conflict and violence. This number is up sharply from just 5 years ago, owing primarily to the chaos in the Middle East, with Syria alone the source of nearly 1 in every 4 refugees in the world today. Now, the attention to this refugee crisis is getting from the UN not only reflects the increasing number of refugees and the increase in humanitarian efforts, but this large number of refugees are causing social and political burdens on countries like Jordan, Turkey, Lebanon, and Pakistan. Now, these countries are attempting to house these large number of groups, while also trying to determine a safe way to go about it. Now, extremists and terrorists could easily work their way and blend into these huge crowds of refugees. Now, Haass goes on to explain that there are 4 steps to helping and essentially preventing another refugee crisis. First and foremost is take steps to ensure that people don't need to flee their countries, or if they have, to create conditions that permit them to eventually return home. Now, the second way to help refugees is to ensure their safety and well-being. Refugees are particularly vulnerable, especially when they are on the move. And after they arrive, many fundamentals are needed, including health, education, and physical safety, must be met. Now here, the challenge for host states is to guarantee adequate provisions of essential services. The third thing he suggests is allocating economic resources to help deal with the burden. The United States and Europe both are the largest contributors to the UN High Commission on Refugees, but many other governments are unwilling to commit their fair share. Richard Haass goes on to say that these countries who do not contribute their fair share should be named and shamed. Now, the final aspect of any refugee program involves finding places for them to go. The political reality, though, is that most governments are unwilling to commit to take in any specific number or percentage of the world's refugees. Now, again, those who do their fair share should be singled out for praise, like Europe and the United States. Others, Richard Haas states, should be named and shamed and criticized. Now, we'll see what we can get done in September in New York. And if you want to read more about Richard Haas's article about the refugees issue coming to New York, you can see all of that article on that website. You can see all of that article on the Council on Foreign Relations website. Now, moving on to Hannah Thoburn, a research fellow of the Hudson Institute, she wrote about what exactly is going on in Ukraine. Now, back in 2014, Ukraine territories have been invaded and occupied by Russia. But more recently, there has been some worrisome activity in Crimea, more specifically on the Russian-occupied side of the Crimean border. Nobody knows for sure what happened, but some sort of incident occurred where 2 Russian service members ended up dead. Now, even though this happened over the weekend, nothing really escalated until a few days later in the week when Russia accused Ukraine of crossing the border and committing terrorist acts. Russia said, "We will not let this pass idly by." The Ukrainian government has denied any involvement in this activity or this incident, and a U.S. ambassador to Ukraine was quoted saying, "Government has seen nothing so far that corroborates Russian allegations." Now, the Ukrainian president, Petro Poroshenko, warned that this was a pretext for Russian military threats against Ukraine. He ordered the whole Ukrainian military on the Crimean border at full combat readiness. But while the Ukrainian president is doing this, Vladimir Putin really hasn't suggested a full-scale military incursion, even though Ukrainians just basically activated their military, and Russia has been seeing heavy equipment coming into the peninsula and moving Russian heavy equipment moving into the area and going northward. And there's also been Russian naval activity and exercises in the Black Sea. Now, Putin said that our American and European partners think that it is already evident to everyone that those in power in Kiev today do not seek to resolving the problem through negotiations, but are instead resulting to terror. So he blamed Ukraine, comes out and says Kiev are the ones who did this. Kiev doesn't want peace, and we cannot stand we cannot stand for these acts of terror, supposedly, that the leaders in Kiev are performing. Now, it's really hard to say what Putin's game plan is here. He makes another country activate your military over here. You start running naval exercises in the Black Sea, but you don't say a word about any of this. You don't mention it. You don't hint at possibly moving forward past the Crimean border. Nothing. So, like we stated in an earlier segment, this just kind of confirms the unpredictability that we said Putin is now known for. Now, staying on the topic of Russia, we'll be visiting the Atlantic Council, where I found an article by Jonathan Marcus of BBC. The article's title reads, "Are Russia's military advances a problem for NATO?" Well, unfortunately, this may be true. For more than a decade, America and its allies have been involved in battling counterinsurgency in Iraq and Afghanistan, and largely have given up on high-end mechanized warfare. Well, why is this? Well, during the initial invasion into Iraq, the U.S. and its allies were overwhelmingly dominant. They controlled the skies, they could easily communicate and gather intelligence on the enemy. Now, commander of U.S. forces in Europe, Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, noted in December of last year, "It's been a long time since American soldiers have had to worry about an enemy up in the sky, having the ability to drop bombs." He also added they have had not to worry about their communications being jammed or intercepted. Now, in combat in eastern Ukraine, electronic jamming by specialized Russian units has been highly effective. Indeed, Russia has won the battle in the electromagnetic spectrum hands down. It has demonstrated a remarkable ability to locate Ukrainian units, to jam their signals, and then to bring down devastating fire. Now, in some incidents, sizable Ukrainian forces have been nearly wiped out entirely in a matter of minutes. The Russians have also shown a sophisticated ability to use drones. Often they use them in pairs, one to draw fire, and then the other one comes in providing the targeting data for artillery and rocket forces, who can instantly respond. Now, a recent British Army study into Russia's performance raised question marks about the survivability of some of their own newest but lightly armored vehicles in this new environment. So this is getting a little scary. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, the United States and its allies in Europe are no longer ahead of the military game. Russia is now the head. But let's move away from Russia. Let's come back to the United States and bring this conversation back and make this, in this show, with something a little bit more close to home. Well, the American Enterprise Institute worked with the Los Angeles Times back in 1985. They decided to come together and work together again in 2016. Well, in 1985, they issued a survey that was issued to determine what Americans thought about the poor, poverty, and welfare in the United States. Now, the exact same survey was issued in 2016, and they discovered some strikingly similarities and differences in the results. Now, listen to this, ladies and gentlemen. The first question shows a major increase in support for workfare. Workfare is a welfare system that requires those receiving benefits to perform some sort of work or participate in job training. Now, in 1985, 51% were in support of workfare, and today, 87% support a job requirement to receive welfare benefits. Now, here's an answer that really hasn't changed much since 1985. 59% of all respondents in 1985 and 54% in 2016 say welfare benefits make people dependent and encourage them to stay poor. That number hasn't changed much by just a couple percent. And I'm sorry, recent college grads or anybody else who's unemployed looking for a job. If you're currently looking for a job, this next statistic may be a little bit discouraging. Now, in 1985, they said 43% of people said it was very hard for poor people to get work. Well, in 2016, 57% say it is extremely difficult. When given a choice, a large majority, 60%, say people are responsible for their own well-being and have an obligation to take care of themselves. Now, 67% nationally gave that response in 1985. As in 1985, people in 2016 survey think the poor work hard and have the same abilities as other people. They also believe that conditions for poor people have gotten worse rather than improved in the past 15 years. Now, you can find this entire survey and the complete results at the bottom of the article on the American Enterprise Institute website. You can find the links to all of these articles below in the description. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, give us a like on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter. Well, thank you for watching. This was your Top Think Tanks review, and I was your host, Bryce Dolan. But we'll see you next time.